Yeah.
I gotta let in a couple people here. Got it.
I think you might be missing a page.
All right. Logan made it. Now that Logan's here, we can get started, right? Okay. Facebook is live. That's important. And we are ready to roll. Or almost. Okay. So let me do one more thing here. Of course, this is technology, so it's always fun. 1 second. Got it. What?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, they should be about the same. They were all copied for the master copy. All right, so good evening, everybody. Good to see you. Those are here and those are not yet here. As always, we have to start with a joke. Before we get to the joke, I have to get to something serious, and that is that I didn't have as much time to prepare tonight as I would have liked. So really, it's a thought, some thoughts I wanted to impart. There is a text base to it, but it's not as much about the text as the ideas that I want to talk about. Many times we go through classes that are more Jewish law based. Sometimes you have classes that are based on, there's different areas of the Torah, exploring text. And this is more exploring the mystical side of Judaism, why it's important, and what it can do for you in your Jewish life and in your life in general. So they say that Hamlet, he went to the emergency room with a very bad cough, and he says, TB or not TB? That is the question. Okay. Sorry. It was actually difficult looking for it to be or not to be jokes. I recall so many of them, but I couldn't actually recall any. I had to, really search for one. Yeah, the other joke is you have this picture of like this apartment building, and you have like one door that says 2B and the other one says not 2B. Anyways, so why did I put this up? Because tonight's question is to know or to believe. And as I said in the class header, very often we have throughout the Jewish text, it will tell us what's missing is belief in God. Then we have other text that says you should know God. And so what is it? Do we have to know God? Do we have to believe in God? Is there a synergy between the two? And so that's what we're going to discuss. So we're going to start with, well, you know what? I'll start with a question if anybody has any thoughts about it. But we say belief in God all the time, but is belief in God a belief, or is it a knowledge? Well, let's first define the word belief. So let's Google the word belief. Can we believe what Merriam-Webster says? But let's belief, Merriam, and I always misspelled belief. Webster, belief, Merriam-Webster. So let's hear what Merriam-Webster has to say. Belief is a state or habit of mind in which trust or confidence is placed in some person or thing, which could be, as it says here, i.e. belief in God, belief in democracy. I bought a table in belief that it was antique. It was an antique. So you basically have your mind is placing trust or confidence in a certain item or thing. Now, it's not saying whether that belief is rational or not, right? Good evening. So again, that's one way of defining belief, is saying it's a belief that a thing is a certain way. And when you think about it, really anything that you think is a belief. Good evening, Amy. Anything you think is a belief. What do I mean by that? We make our beliefs based on certain data. However, as we know, data is never 100% conclusive. That's why everything says 99.9%. You buy a Lysol bottle, it says this kills 99.9% of germs. Well, we have a belief when we're going to spray it's going to kill the germs. Of course, there's always an outlier. Something could happen, it may not. In a sense, one can make the argument that really everything is a belief. Some things are more of a belief than others, but ultimately, as Merriam-Webster points out, right, you believe this is antique. So you have data to go by that, the seller says it's an antique. You brought an expert who looks at it and says, this looks like an antique. And so you're putting your belief and trust in these people, but it's still possible that it's not an antique. Now, people who go through life without any belief, it's a very rough life, actually, right? If you go through life without any belief in anything, then you're never trusting, right? You have no trust, and anything everybody tells you, you're very suspect, and it's a very difficult life to live. Just think, you wouldn't be able to do anything. You would not be able to get into a car because you would not believe the automaker would make it safe. You would not get into a roller coaster. You would not get into an airplane. So we rely on belief to a certain extent. However, generally in life, again, this is the definition from Merriam-Webster, generally in life, actually here it gives Merriam-Webster has another way of putting it. Belief is something that is accepted, considered to be true, or held as an opinion, something believed. So it's accepted. It's a belief. It's still called a belief. You cannot know something 100% in this world. And I'm not just saying that according to Hume, H-U-M-E, David Hume's theory of uncertainty, we don't know anything for certain. That's not to say that you shouldn't suppose that certain things are true, but we don't know anything for certain. I think quantum mechanics or physics, however they call it, has showed that actually what we believed for so long was thrown in kind of a loop. So what I'm getting to here is I'm not trying to tell you that, it's just believe in God because, just like you believe anything else, we'll believe in God. But all I'm trying to define is the word belief. And we have to realize that to an extent, we all carry beliefs with us every single day. What are our beliefs based on? Our best data. Our best data tells us that we will believe this to be true. I believe when I get into an elevator, it will go up. I believe when I get into an airplane, it will fly. And all those different types of things. The third actually way that he puts it is in Merriam-Webster, conviction of the truth of some statement or reality of some being or phenomenon, especially when based on examination of evidence. So here you see again, Merriam-Webster is even defining belief even when something is based on evidence, because of the evidence, you are convinced that this is the truth. But again, it still could be classified as a belief because there's nothing that you can really know 100%. Anybody has any thoughts or comments? Just an interesting way of looking at belief. It's about looking at the dictionary.
This reminds me kind of today's Tanya lesson, if you read it already. The Tanya lesson in the Tanya.
Lesson in Tanya, yeah.
Yeah, the Tanya today was talking about the circumcision of the heart.
Yeah.
Was talking about how do we really know what we believe? Why do we pray out loud? It was such a along the lines of
how do we know what we believe, right? Yeah. Okay. So all this will lead us into an interesting discussion today, belief or knowledge of God. But again, this is all the technicality of the word belief. However, practically in life, we typically associate belief with a belief not based on any empirical evidence, right? So let's say I believe in my children, right? I have faith, I have trust, I have belief. There's no data yet to say that they will be successful, but I believe in them, right? A belief, some people will say belief in God or belief in religion, which we can get into a little bit, soon, but people will say those are beliefs. They're not based on heavy data. And that's generally how we define belief. All I was saying a moment ago is that even when you have data, technically you can still define it as a belief, because even with data, nothing is ever 100%. There was once a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Shochet, he was once giving a sermon on this very topic. He tells the story. He was giving a sermon in a big hall, and he says, you're all sitting here in this room. You have a certain belief that this ceiling is not going to cave in. You're trusting in all the engineers. And he says 3 hours after he finished his speech, the ceiling of the roof caved in. And then everybody says, Rabbi, you're pulling off a trick. You must have put dynamite in it or something. No, it happened to be, every once in a while, these things happen, but we can't, it's hard for us to go in life without this faith and belief in these things, because it would be a very difficult life. Back to our religious topic over here. We have different texts in the Torah. Some of them tell us to believe in God, and some of them tell us to know God, which we would think would be two different things. So let's go take a look here. Yes, let's take a look. This is it's a different book, but yeah. Okay, it says here we have one verse from Deuteronomy. It says, "V'yadaita hayom," and you shall know today, "V'ashevota elav avecha," and you shall take to your heart that Hashem is the God in the heaven above and the earth below. There is none else. And here he asks a question. There's another verse earlier before that says you should know God, but let me scroll down to the other verse. No. Okay. So that is a verse that speaks about belief. Now we all know that there's so many verses in the Torah that speak about knowledge of God, right? So for example, you have all that you're missing is a belief in God. Yan la mind to be, because you didn't believe in me. So many verses that talk about belief. So what would you say? Is our belief in God a belief, or is it a knowledge? Do we know God, or do we believe in God?
Okay, so based on what I read in the alphabet today,
Yeah.
there's two levels, right? So essentially they're both true at the same time, but there's different levels. You believe God only without the knowledge of God if you still have the clip over your heart, if you haven't had this position on the heart, which is your responsibility to, break through the material world and come to know God, especially, the Shekinah of God.
So you're saying until you have refined yourself, you're stuck at belief, but once you refine yourself, you can get to the knowledge. You can get to the knowledge. Okay. We will touch upon that also, yes. But let me start at a more basic level. That will be the second stage. But in the first stage, good evening, Shelley. You made it in? You're all good? Yeah, it's trouble. Okay. For some reason, my Zoom meetings don't agree with everybody. The meeting idea has some issues. Okay. So at a more basic level, we'll go with the story. Before I gave this, when I sent out the name of the class, Jacob sent me a text. Are you going to tell the story? I said, yeah, I'll tell the story. He actually asked me if I'm going to start with the story. I said, no, I have to start with a joke, but I'll tell the story. So the story goes like this. There was a rabbi called Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. I mentioned him on Shabbos, and he was from the city of Berditchev, right? Okay. Very good. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev from the city of Berditchev. And he grew up in a time where Hasidism, Hasidic philosophy, was just starting. For those who don't know what Hasidic philosophy is, Hasidic philosophy, we can say, started with the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, a great rabbi about 300 years ago, which gave a focus on the mystical areas of the Torah, even for the simple people. They can have a connection with the mystical meanings of the Torah. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev got involved in Hasidic philosophy, and his father-in-law was not into that. His father-in-law was into, what do you mean? Well, why do you need to get into all this mysticism? Isn't it good enough to just, you study the Torah, you study the Bible, you do the commandments, and you're good. That's what it means to be a good Jew. Why do you need to study all this other stuff?
That's what they told the Baal Shem Tov anyways.
Yeah, that's what they told him too. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev went out of town to study by the great Maggid of Mezrich. He came back home, and his father-in-law asked him, tell me, you spent a couple months by this great rabbi, this great mystical rabbi. What did you learn? He says, what did I learn? I learned that there's a God. So the father-in-law is like eye-popping, like, that's what you learned? You learned that there's a God, a religious guy? So he calls over, they had in their house a housekeeper, a Jewish housekeeper, and he calls her and he says, Bluma, or whatever her name was, Bluma, tell me, do you believe that there's a God? She says, yes, of course I believe there's a God. I grew up believing there's a God. And he turns to son-in-law, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and says, you see, she didn't go to Mezrich. She didn't go study the mysticism. She believes in a God. Why did you need to go anywhere? And he answers her, she believes there's a God, but I know that there's a God. I'll say it again. She believes that there's a God. I know there's a God. What does that mean? It means that, yes, we can go through life with a very basic connection to God. You grew up as a child. Your parents tell you there's a God. And so you believe in God and you live your life like that, very basic and simple. Maybe that worked, by the way, in the shtetl. I don't know how well that type of simple faith works today. certain personalities it'll work for, yes. But on a whole, our belief and faith and connection to God has to develop over time. As we get older and as we get wiser and smarter, we have to upgrade our belief in God. That's why you have so many people who they call God the old man in the sky, or like the God is going to send lightning bolts after you. Maybe they were taught something in Hebrew school or something, and they refuse to upgrade their belief in God. I was reading actually a story. There's a Chabad Rabbi Dov Yonah Korn. He's in Bowery in Manhattan. A fascinating life story. How he was searching for meaning in life, and he went literally everywhere, and he just was against exploring Judaism because he thought he knew it all. He went to Hebrew school as a kid and he got bar mitzvahed, and he felt it had no meaning in life. And somehow eventually, what was the story? I don't remember. He walked into, his uncle somehow convinced him to go into Chabad, and somehow he got hooked in, and now he's a Chabad rabbi running large organizations. But the idea is that sometimes we have these beliefs and ideas, and we really need to upgrade them. We grow up with a certain idea about God. And this is really the differentiation between knowing God and believing in God. And in a deeper level, there are aspects of God that we can know, and there are aspects of God that we can believe. I'll say that again. There are aspects of God that we can know, and there are aspects of God that we can believe. And if we use belief where we can use knowledge, then we're being lazy. Again, if we're using belief where we can be using knowledge, we're being lazy. Belief is supposed to be used for areas where knowledge cannot get us there. So what do I mean? What I mean is the belief that there is a God, the belief that there's a creator of the world. One can reach to that conclusion without any religion. Aristotle reached it through philosophy. There are scientists that reach it through science. Of course, there are scientists that decide not to believe in it. But there are ways to reach the knowledge, the belief that there is a God without any religion, without any dogma, without any books of the Torah. The idea that there's divine design, that there is a God, that is something that one can reach to regardless. However, the ability to know certain things about God is based on our belief. So, and things that we're, let's say, told in the Torah, things that the Torah tells us, some of the commandments. But I'm talking specifically about God himself. Okay, so let's give an example. That there is a God, I can say one can see from the world itself, right? Even though we nobody has ever seen God. Well, actually, they have. Moses, the prophet saw God, and the Jewish people saw God at Mount Sinai. But generally, most of us haven't seen God, right? How can we come to belief in God? I'm sure many of you have books in your house and belief in God and things, but a very simple idea is one can start with a world. You say, all this stuff is here, and how did it come to be? And there's all these different debates, and of course, there's obviously the debate of evolution, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole very long. I think I spent a lot of time one Friday night recently about that. Right? I think 2 weeks ago I spent a lot of time on that. There are many books and studies we can do about it. One of my favorites is a book called God, Rationality, and Mysticism by Professor Bloch, where he basically, he was a professor of philosophy in London, Ontario, where he basically points out that it's more rational to believe in God than not. Again, going back to really any knowledge is really based on what is the more likely scenario. One can never prove anything 100%. That's why I went back. That's why I brought to Merriam-Webster. But he pointed out that it's more rational to believe in God than to believe in the other options of how the world came to be.
More faith not to believe than.
Yeah, in a sense, yes, it takes more faith not to believe. People don't realize that. In a sense, it takes a lot more faith not to believe in God than it does to believe in God. But this is where people get confused. There's the belief that there is a God, and then there's the religious aspects where we need faith. So certain things that we are told about God come to us by faith. The Torah tells it to us, and we have to believe it about God. Now, even there, I could spend a lot of time discussing why the belief in the Torah is based on knowledge, not on faith alone, based on the many witnesses at Mount Sinai. And again, I guess you can't get everything in one class. But let's say the belief that God exists beyond time. Okay, the belief that past, present, and future by God is all the same. That is not necessarily, I don't think you can reach that conclusion based on philosophy alone. I don't think you can reach that conclusion based on any study of this world. That would be a belief that we have, based on the scriptures that we're told. Those are beliefs that we have about God. And so what I'm getting to is we have to allow our knowledge to take us to a certain point and then allow our faith to take us to the next step. And that's why the verses have these different things. There has to be a belief in God and there has to be a knowledge of God. That's one reason you need both faith and knowledge of God. And you don't have to use faith for everything. It would be like overusing Tylenol when all you need to do is sleep, right? I don't know if it's a bad example or not. It's far-fetched, but right, if you're overusing something, you don't need to use faith for everything, right? And for some people, if they overuse faith, it gets a little difficult. However, the flip side of that is our starting point is belief. What I mean by that is that we believe what we're told, and then we try and understand. That's what the Jewish people said at Mount Sinai. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will hear. We will do what God asks of us to do, and then we will hear, we will listen, and we will try to understand what it is that you're trying to tell me. So first comes the faith and the belief in God, and then you try and understand. I think a good example of this is, I think in a lot of areas where you don't have the time to explore it right away. Let's say you're taking a medication, your doctor tells you to take the medication. Let's say it's a car, the mechanic says, you need to do this, otherwise your car's going to blow up. The problem is people aren't trusting mechanics, people aren't trusting a doctor. So these are not great examples anymore, but once upon a time they were. You can choose to fix the car and then understand it later, right? But if you wait till you fully understand it, so you go back to medical school and examine exactly how this medication works, by that time you may be dead, right? So we don't always have the opportunity of spending the time and understanding everything. Sometimes we have to do things based on faith, but where we can and where we have the time, God tells us, via daita hayom, you shall know today, vashevota levech, and you shall place it to your heart. We have to spend that time to get to know God, not just to believe, but to know. Now, why does God want us to know God? Why does God want us to spend time? Shouldn't God be happy enough with our belief and faith in him? Why does God want us to study him and get to know him in rational ways on top of our belief? It's a question.
The essence of our mission down here, right?
Well, our mission is wouldn't you think our mission is to do what God wants? God just wants us to study the Bible and do the mitzvahs. Listen to him. Why does God care that we spend time getting to know him? Any thoughts?
Well, he wants a real personal relationship with us.
Very good. Because God wants a relationship with us. People get very often confused and just believe that God has just a mission for us. In other words, what is a mission? A mission would mean I need food from Walmart, and so I'm going to fill out my app, and the groceries are going to come, and therefore that's a mission. I just need to get those groceries to my house, and whichever driver is going to do it for me, I'm happy, right? So then it's done. However, when you ask your child to set up the dining room table, it's not just a mission that you want to get accomplished. There's also a relationship dynamic that's going on. And in fact, if the parent is missing the relationship dynamic, that causes problems when the child doesn't do it. And if the parent forgets that there's a deeper thing than just a mission, you're really trying to create a relationship and elevate your child and teach them independence. And if when they don't do things, you just blow up at them and you lose that bond and connection with them, then you've kind of lost what you're trying to do. So in these commandments that God gives us, very often it's very easy to just look at the Torah and say, well, God just, has certain things that he wants to get done. God has certain ideas and items that he wants us that he needs done. And we're unfortunately the ones stuck with it, right? We, the Jews, we're the ones that are stuck with it. And if we don't do it, we get punished. If we do it, we get rewarded. But in truth, I think the fact that we Jews are stuck with this mission actually tells you that there's a relationship element to it. The fact that God doesn't say, well, if the Jews aren't doing it, let me find somebody else. No, God says, I'm not going to do it, despite what possibly some other religions may say. God is not ever going to give up. Well, actually, God, in Judaism, by the way, everybody has a mission, Jews and non-Jews alike, but we as Jews have a very specific mission, the 613 commandments. And God says, I'm never going to switch you for anybody else. I'm not going to allow someone else to do it. It's only for you. Why? If it's just about getting the commandments done, let someone else do it. Because there's a deeper dynamic, there's a relationship. Yes.
The penicillin example that's given for that.
Yes. There's yeah, it's a slightly different topic. Yeah, there's an example given of penicillin, which is right. It's just a general question. If these mitzvahs are really good, then why shouldn't anybody do it? Why do you have to be Jewish? And so one of the answers is, it's like certain medications. Certain medications will be great for somebody who's sick and terrible for somebody who's healthy, or the same medication for two people are sick, but for some people it'll be really good, and other people have a deathly, horrible reaction to. So God knows us. God created us in a certain way, and he has an intimate knowledge of who we are and our mission in life. And so we as Jewish people gave us a special mission. Just as if you are a parent and you know your child's strengths and weaknesses, and what is their best served for in their mission in life, you're not going to try to force all your kids to do piano lessons if one of them is not cut out for it. Now, if that's just with a parent that didn't create the child, just knows the child's strengths, how much more so God knows who is set aside for what commandments and who is not. Anyways, back to the original idea is this is why it's important that we get a knowledge of God. Knowledge of God allows us to not just be simple soldiers and just accept everything on faith, which we should do because we will never be God, and so God's knowledge will always be greater than ours, and so we should never assume that I know better than God. But yet at the same time, we want to develop a relationship, because it's not just about listening to every single thing that he says, but there's a relationship dynamic that we want to create over here. And the relationship dynamic is chiefly expressed when it comes to prayer, which I'll discuss momentarily. But yes, what do you want to say?
I might be treading on that. But
Okay, go for it.
is it not discussed that about fulfilling certain mitzvahs, or when it comes to like tefillos, about if you don't do it with kavanah, then you don't really actually fulfill the mitzvah in many senses, because you don't have the understanding, or you don't have the intent or meaning behind it.
Most mitzvahs do not require feeling. They're not required. However, they are important. Again, I think really a great example is with your children, or anybody, or any actually dynamic or relationship where somebody's doing something for you. You can have the action done for you, and the action will be done. But if there's no feeling in it, that relationship is fractured, and to a certain extent, you'll feel kind of empty about that action that was done. That action will be almost an empty action. It'll be almost like a dead action, right? So, if you have spouses and one of them, begrudgingly does something with a frown and complaining, but doing exactly what you wanted, right? But that will feel like a very empty gesture. So the gesture will be done, but it will be empty. It says the same thing is about deeds that are done without feeling, without any feeling towards God. So you do that mitzvah, the action has been done, but it says without any feeling, it says it's like a bird without wings. It's like a bird without wings. So you have a bird, the bird is there, has no wings, it can't fly up. You do a mitzvah without any feeling, then it doesn't fly to God, so to speak. it's there, it exists, doesn't fly to God. That's one of my other favorite stories. Is the Baal Shem Tov one time walked into a temple, into a study hall, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I can't even get in. This house is so full of prayer and good deeds." And they thought he was giving them a compliment, but in truth, he explained afterwards. He says, "No, there's so many dry actions and prayers being done here. It's full of good deeds because it's not flying to heaven. It's all stuck here in this room." So, where did we get to today?
It doesn't go up.
Huh?
I believe it's spiritual. It really doesn't go up.
Yeah, it doesn't go up. Like I said, and I think my physical example is really good. You know, the action is done, but the connection is not made. And really, a mitzvah is really about connection. They're connection points to God. They're creating all these connection points to God, and through the mitzvah lights up the world, creates all these connections in the world to God. That connection is very sorely lacking. I think the difference, though, is that if you didn't do the action at all, it's much easier to fix it later than if you did the action, but it was an empty action, it's a lot easier to fix it than if you didn't do the action, right? So let's say, the spouses that are arguing and, they're not doing anything for each other at any point at all. And then they go into therapy. I think it's a lot longer of a road than if they reconcile and they were both doing these things all along. And then suddenly all those actions that were done, you regain feeling to an extent. Kind of retrospectively, huh?
You give it even if you feel begrudging.
Well, tzedakah, yeah. Well, all the mitzvahs you should do even if you're not feeling them right now. That's my example earlier. So I've gone to a lot of things. Let me recap because I've spoken a lot of things. Let's recap so you have something clarified in your mind. We started off discussing belief and faith, and I pointed out that truthfully, any knowledge that you have is to an extent a belief. Some beliefs are more grounded in data than others, but ultimately anything is a belief. But practically in life, we typically say things that have more data to it, more pointers to say this is the truth. We usually will call that more knowledge. Some people might call it fact, however you want to call it. So God tells us in the Torah, we need to both know him and believe in him. We wanted to know why. Shouldn't God be happy enough with belief? And the answer is that God wants us to have a knowledge of him to the extent that we can possible, to get to the greatest point of knowledge that we can. And I explained, what does it mean to know God? And based on going back to our Merriam-Webster idea before, like I said, I believe it's more rational to believe that there's a God. And there are many aspects of God that we can know through the world. As somebody once said, you can't see God, but you can see his works, right? Nobody has ever seen Leonardo da Vinci, right? Or have that? Well, people did many years ago, but people see his works. Through his works, you can know somewhat about that person, right? Some people are great building architects. They can walk into a building and say, "Wow," and they can tell so much about the architect based on seeing what's in the building. A great example is we can understand. Let's say an example about God. We can know that God appreciates beauty by the fact that he puts beauty in this earth, right? The beauty of the sunrise and all those things. He appreciates beauty, colors, knowledge, something God appreciates. That's the highest thing in this world. So there's a lot of different things we can know about God, but there are certain things that come on faith, and God wants us to have both knowledge and faith. First of all, you want to have faith because that's what you can always fall back on. As King Solomon says, Chanoch lanar al pi darko, educate a child according to their path, because even when they get old, they will not stray from it. So there's a general idea to have faith. Faith is something you can always fall back on, but ultimately God wants that relationship. And the relationship and that loving relationship with God comes mostly through knowledge, mostly through the knowledge of God and getting to know God. But how do we further our feelings towards God? All right, so we said the reason to know God is to enhance our feelings. How do we further our feelings towards God? So one way to further enhance our feelings towards God is obviously actions. As odd as that sounds, doing things for someone else can add to your connections and feelings. So any mitzvah that you do will connect you with God, of course, and can actually further your feelings, just as any relationship. When you do actions and behaviors of connection, that adds to your feeling. But there's one specific mitzvah that is all about gaining feeling towards God, and that is the mitzvah of prayer. prayer is not really even technically a mitzvah. There's not really a mitzvah to pray every single day. The mitzvah is actually only when you need something, you should turn to God. However, prayer is really what enhances and elevates all of our other religious actions that we do. And I'm saying this because a lot of times people get bored with prayer. It's the same prayers. It's the joke I said the other week, right? This guy comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I'm not coming to synagogue every more. You're always singing the same thing. So the rabbi says, yeah, well, you only come for Kol Nidre. Of course, it's the same thing, right? So we can get bored of the prayers. And the truth is that prayer should be the fuel to our entire religious experience. That's what prayer is meant to be. Prayer is meant to be the fuel to our entire religious experience. Tefillah, the word tefillah also comes from the word tofel, which means connection. Prayer is supposed to be a connection between us and God. Through prayer, we allow ourselves a time to contemplate about God, right? Let's put it this way. When your children are just doing things for you, they don't necessarily have to think about you, right? But when you spend a quality time with them, that's when you're really building the relationship. The quality time you spend with them, you sit down with them, you talk to them, you read to them a book, whatever, you're spending quality time. When we're busy just doing actions for God, so let's say we're busy cleaning the house for Pesach, or we're busy, again, take any relationship. If if a spouse says don't go on dates, they're just always doing things for others. So technically there's no issues in the marriage, but there's also no bond in that marriage. There's no connection going on over there. Or there is a connection, but it's very, anybody who's married knows that if you don't, ever spend time together and just life is running, and it could take a toll on the relationship. Same with children. If you don't take, if somebody goes to work every day and so they're taking care of their kids and their kids know, yeah, daddy takes care of me and he gets the money, or mom, she goes to work, makes the money, and, gets what I need and pays for us to go to camp. But if there's no time spent together, these are the kids that are going to be spending a lot of money in therapy years later. So you're going to have to spend a lot, right? Yeah, right. Isn't there? That's another one of my favorite stories. Is there's three kids. There's three bubbies sitting in Florida, each one boasting about their kid. And so the first one says, my son, you wouldn't believe, such a good son. He bought me this beautiful Rolls Royce. Amazing. The other bubby says, you wouldn't believe, my son, my tchotchke, even better. He's into real estate. He got me a Learjet. And the third one says, both of you are nothing. My son, he thinks about me all the time. In fact, he paid for himself a therapist and all he talks is about me, right? So that's the joke they say. So, if you're missing the connection, it's going to be empty. And I think sometimes, we have that. This can happen particularly in a very religious upbringing, but it can also happen in a very not religious upbringing. Also, I see it happening in both. In the religious upbringing, sometimes, the parents are always getting the kids to do this and do that action, wash your hands and study this and do that. And it becomes a very dry Judaism, lots of actions. Or conversely, sometimes very not religious families, but very traditional, also have the same problem where the kids are doing certain actions. Now you got to fast because it's Yom Kippur. Now, today you got to eat matzah and, certain actions, but if it wasn't, they never got that connection and bond to God, they again feel like all these empty actions. And the antidote to all of this is really prayer. But unfortunately, prayer is another thing that people look at very boring, right? Because you can come to synagogue, it can look very boring, whether it's an Orthodox, conservative, or Reform service. Either one of them, if you're not accustomed to it, can be long, can be a lack of. In any one, you really need to. Prayer requires work. It's not spontaneous, really, is the idea. Any type of prayer to God is not spontaneous. This is really the difference between any other relationship that we've been talking about till now on God. in a relation with a spouse, it's pretty easy. Set a date, you sit down, you talk. God is invisible, okay? Automatically, the emotions and the feelings and the connection towards God are going to be much more difficult. And this is actually ties into a topic we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. That is why over time, the prayer service has gotten longer. It says that, back in the days when prayer was first written by the Men of Great Assembly, prayer was much shorter. Why is prayer so much longer nowadays? Is because as we get less spiritually sensitized, that ability to connect with God through prayer becomes that much harder. And so we actually need to spend more time on it. So when people want to know why the prayer is so long, that's because it takes so long to feel that connection to God. It's not spontaneous. It's not easy. It's not quick. And
If I wait too long between Shacharit prayer and Mincha, I feel it. I feel like
if you wait too long between prayers.
between prayer.
So that's that's the next step, which I'll get to in a moment. That's already what prayer does. First, I'm saying a proper prayer takes effort, which we
real
can
effort of the heart.
yeah, it's called actually the Torah calls it la'avdo b'levav b'chol levavchem, to serve God with all your heart. The sages say, what does it mean to serve God with all your heart? How do you serve God with your heart, right? I can serve with my hands. How do I serve somebody with my heart? And it says that is the service of the heart, which is prayer. Prayer is the service of the heart. So you may all be looking at me and saying, Rabbi, so you're telling me prayer is this great experiential moment where I'm going to gain my relationship with God, that's going to add knowledge of God and going to add feeling and infuse my actions and my mitzvahs. So now I'm suddenly going to eat matzah with love because I've been praying, but I don't see it in the prayer book. It's the same prayer book every single day, and it's so long. And that's a good question. We'll have to address that. But for now, you have to accept on faith so far. Accept on faith so far. And we'll have to demonstrate how, but you have to accept on faith so far that prayer is really that time. So far, hopefully you understand at least that you need the time in the day to create that bond and connection with God, to create that relationship. And it's not something that could be spontaneous like other relationships, because God is not visible with a physical eye. So something that requires time. Now, just to address what you were saying when you go from one prayer to the next and you have too much time, you feel, I guess it's petering off. There's actually a description towards that. It says that prayer, when you walk out of prayer, if you pray the correct way and you built up that feeling towards God and that connection, it's like a flaming fire. Anybody went camping, you make a big bonfire, but then as the night goes, it slowly dies down. And so that's what we have the other prayers. So in the morning, we make this big bonfire, and then you come by mincha, come by the afternoon prayers, and you stoke it again, and you add a couple logs. And then you come by mar of the evening prayers, and you let it go again until you go to sleep. It can go out, while you're sleeping. But that's the idea. That's why there's all these prayers during the day. The first one is one to really get you going, get you started. And then you have the smaller ones to keep that flame going, to last you till the end of the day. That's why there's 3 prayers a day, to get us going in all these different areas. That was a little bit of a side point, but just a technicality to explain why one may feel after a while that the prayer starts to fade out, and that makes sense. So to recap, we started off, and I always like to recap. Recap is always important because it helps us remember. So to recap, we started off discussing to be or not to be, to know or to believe, how Judaism, some places in the Torah tells us to know God, some places it tells us to believe in God. We discussed what it means, what belief really is, according to Merriam-Webster at least, which is an interesting discussion in itself. But we ended off saying that, truthfully, however you want to define it, God wants us to have both a belief in Him, because first of all, that's a good way to start. And there are certain things that are beyond knowledge, but He wants us to gain knowledge wherever we can of Him, and to study Him, and to allow that relationship to blossom. And that's why knowledge is required. And when do we spend time doing this is around prayer. And in fact, in Hasidic groups, because prayer is that time dedicated and set aside to work on that relationship, because other times we're doing things for God, we're busy doing, we're not busy having, so to speak, those date nights. That's what prayer is. It's that date time with God and spending time talking to God and creating that connection. And this is why in Hasidism, we actually spend time before we pray studying about God. Maimonides writes, and he says like this. He says that the Torah commands us that we have to love and fear God. Right? It says, "V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha," and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. It's a commandment. You should love somebody. Now, he asks the question, he says, you cannot command somebody to love something, right? I can make you do something, but how can I make you feel something, right? So when the Torah says you should love God, or you should fear God, or you should have awe of God, how can that be a commandment? In other words, how can God give a commandment on something that you cannot do, right? It's interesting, even in parenting, listening to some parenting classes, like you can't like force your kids to love each other. You can make them treat each other with respect. You can't force them to love each other. Hopefully that comes over time. If they're fighting, usually it does. But you can't force them to love each other. So how can God come to us and tell us, you shall love the Lord your God? Well, I don't. What am I going to do now? I can do all the mitzvahs. Doesn't mean I love God, right? So Maimonides answers, it does not, obviously the Torah cannot command you to love God, but what it can command you to do is to think in ways that will hopefully awaken love of God. So again, we cannot command you to feel a certain way, but we can command you to think certain things that hopefully will elicit a love towards God. The key to the heart is the mind. The way to reach to the heart is through the mind. The mind is what gives our heart its feelings. The knowledge that's in our mind gives our heart the feelings. So for example, somebody who does not know about chocolate or possibly has never tasted chocolate will have no desire for chocolate, right? What makes us desire things is our mind and our knowledge about the beauty of those items, okay? The mind is the key to the heart. So in this case, if we want to elicit feelings of love towards God, what type of thoughts could we think that would allow us to come to feelings of love towards God? Any thoughts? Any thoughts? What type of thoughts could you start to think? By the way, they do this in therapy sessions with people too. Like if people are having relationship issues, tell them, make a gratitude list, or, life issues, and look at your gratitude list. This is not just a religious dogma over here. This is just a verifiable fact. If you want to elicit emotions, you want to start thinking certain ways. So what are thoughts that one can use to, I think we spoke about this a little bit in our meditation course, but what are thoughts that one can use to elicit a feeling towards God? Any thoughts? Then I'll shout out at once.
I think the meditation course, didn't it use like the Modani or like the morning?
There's many meditations. I'm asking, yeah, we use many. Gratitude, okay. So gratitude, get more specific. I believe the more specific you are in your gratitude, for example, that's one example, the greater feelings you'll have. Some people are more emotional in general, by the way, just so you know. Some people have a temperament, like you meet people like, wow, they love God so much. How I wish I could do that, right? Well, some people have a temperament that they are just more emotional people. But, gratitude's a good one. Using blessings. So these are all correct. What I want to get to is
Biggest thing for me is
forgiveness. You mean the fact that God forgives you?
Yeah.
Yep. That's another one. So these are all true. So we got gratitude, blessings, forgiveness. That's a meditation I've spoken about. The fact that God forgives us for all our sins. How much more so, we should love him back for letting us slide when we don't let other people slide. Right? We're not like that. So I guess my question, the point though that I would say is these are all true, but since we're talking about God who's invisible, and these are concepts, you have to deeply think about it, right? And the more time you spend on it, the more it will elicit within you those feelings.
Yeah, I should see it completely different. I don't think love, this commandment of love has anything to do with the emotional side of things. It's an action-driven commandment. To love is a verb. This love that we're referring to is not a sentimental, innuendo. This is to love God means to love another Jew. There's a holy spark of God in the Jew, and by loving that Jew, you're loving God Himself. That's what Rambam was saying. I think it was yesterday. But of course, there is a measure of
Maimonides is pretty clear. He asked the question, Heyach derech yes. He says, what is the path to love God? And he says, to contemplate about God. The idea actually is that once you love God, then that will lead to action. That's really the idea, or one of the ideas. Love leads to action. If you truly love God, then you do things for Him. If you truly love somebody else, you'll do actions that will
start with the action.
express your love. Or you could do both. That's what that goes back to what we originally started with. You have to have faith, so you should never not do the action. But ideally, things should start with your feeling. Won't always, because we won't always be in that state. The more detailed, the greater it is. So we can actually look in prayer and see some of the themes within prayer. That's, we have themes of forgiveness. Right? The more you think about the greatness of God in the world, and you look at, there's different parts of the prayer. Some parts of the prayer focus on all the different things that God created in this world, how wonderful this world is. One can even think of lines like Vata Machayat Kul, the fact that God gives us life, which I think is gratitude. Just by spending the moment and saying, wow, I woke up, God allowed me to wake up. He gave me the ability to stand up today. He gave me the breath. Those are all things that can awaken and elicit love within ourselves. But again, we need to spend the time thinking about it. Yes, what do you want to say?
Just interesting thought though, because in some of, like, for instance, if you take the Shemona Esrei, and some of the things that we are thanking, being grateful for, etc., they haven't yet come to fruition though.
Okay, the Amida, you're talking about the silent devotional prayer. Most of the prayers in the middle of that are actually requests.
Mm-hmm.
So the interesting thing in prayer, structure of prayer, which we can't go through all now either. Like I said, you can't cover everything at once, but in the structure of prayer, the actual requests of God are very small. It's really just in the Amida. So most of the Amida is actually requests of God, but the rest of it, I don't think we're thanking God for things that haven't happened. We're actually asking for those things to happen.
Yeah.
We're asking Him. I think the only thing that we maybe point out God's greatness is that God will one day revive the dead.
That's the one I was thinking of.
But that's speaking about God's greatness. Yeah. Well, I guess, if you believe God will revive the dead as we do, it is God's greatness. Although He did revive the dead by giving the Torah Mount Sinai, right?
Multiple times, yeah.
He's done it. Through Elijah He did it. Through Elisha He did it.
When he laid on the.
Yeah. All right, but then there's a deeper way of thinking about God. So there are contemplations and thoughts that we can have about God that are relegated to this world. In other words, relegated to knowledge. Let's put it that way. There are beliefs about there's a way that we get to knowing about God, and this is based on our knowledge of the world. So whether it's gratitude, I feel that without God I wouldn't be alive. Whether it's all the blessings that God has done for us as the Jewish people, which is another theme in the prayer. But then there are sections in the prayers which are focused on things that are otherworldly. We have a focus on angels, focus on the sun. We have, so to speak, the prayer goes from starting at a very low level, not low, but speaking in very humanistic terms, speaking in terms of easy, relatable concepts, and it slowly transitions to less relatable concepts. And that's because we always have to remember that we cannot limit God. God is much greater than just being the creator of this world. God is infinite and means much more than just what He does here Why is that important? Because otherwise you're limiting God and who he is. I'd like to give an example is, let's say kids in a class may only appreciate, let's say, their teacher for what they are as their teacher in their class. A child may only appreciate their parent as somebody who brings them food, right? So a little baby might appreciate that their parent is the one that nurtures them and takes care of them. As they get older, they understand that their parents are much greater than just people who can nurture them and give them food. So in a sense, we in this world have a very limited vision of God. We're very limited to seeing his full greatness because we see him through the prism of this world. Remember, as I said earlier, there's a way we can get to knowledge of God. Well, the knowledge of God, not through faith, but through simple knowledge, is limited to things that are related to this world, right? Because we can only know about God from this world, what this world has. But that is limiting God. One of the cool things about space exploration, I think, for example, space exploration, I think really gives us an idea of the vastness and the breadth of God, just how vast the universe is and all the different things that are in this world. It's expanded our mind to really appreciate the Creator even more, to see how much he's created in this world and all the different things that are there. And God is even greater than all that. God is even greater than the entire universe they're going to discover. That's just a blip in who God is, so to speak, right? So, and that creates, so to speak, a level of awe towards God. So we're talking about awe. There's love, and then there's awe. That creates an awe. People talk about fear of God, but really, I think we need to work on feelings of awe of God. That's just one way to enhance a feeling of awe of God. Awe of God means, wow, God is so great, and nevertheless, he cares about me. I wouldn't want to disappoint him, right?
The word awesome has really been abused.
The word awesome has been
Yeah,
abused.
it doesn't have any meaning when you think of it in
Not
like
anymore.
colloquial text.
Why? Because people use it in social media. Oh, that's awesome.
It's like a surfer dude term now. Oh, that's awesome, man. Instead
That's
of
awesome, right?
awe-inspiring.
Right. It's instead of awe-inspiring. Yeah. It's hashtag God is awesome, right? Look at these waves God created. Hashtag awesome, right? Yeah, God, truthfully, you're right. It's awe-inspiring. Anybody who goes out to a sunset on the beaches over here, I mean, that should be awe-inspiring, instead of just a caption, awesome. So just on, talking about creating feelings of fear of God, we want to get away from the fear of punishment and really feelings of awe of God. And we recognize just how great God is and how much he cares for me. I brought the example many times is, if there's somebody really that you greatly respect, you have awe. Maybe it's your favorite president. Maybe it's your favorite singer. Maybe it's your favorite rabbi. I don't know. Anyways, no, I'm kidding. And then this person asks you to do something, and now you don't want to. You feel in awe of them. You don't want to let them down. So it's not a feeling of, that's not necessarily a feeling of love. It's a feeling of awe. You are in awe of them because that you don't want to let them down. That's really the ultimate level of fear of God that we want to have, is a feeling of awe, having appreciation for his awesomeness. And so why am I not going to eat bread on Passover? Because I'm in awe of God. This great, great God that's vaster than the universe, nevertheless comes to me and says, hey, you boy, you girl, I want you not to eat bread on Passover. Wow. I don't want to let that great God down. So this is just an example.
That is love, Tony.
It's also love and awe can be intertwined, yes. But we can have another course on love and awe, yeah. But let me just finish the point. So what I'm trying to say is that these are just examples of where enhancing that relationship enhances the mitzvahs that we do, the connections that we do, those commandments that we have. And so this is what prayer is about. Prayer is about spending that time. And in some ways, to enhance prayer, one may want to meditate before you even pray and allow yourselves to have an appreciation for God. Because unfortunately, prayer can also be very dry. And I actually want to explore prayer to an extent. I actually have here a whole book. This is just on parts of the prayer from the morning blessing, just for like the first 10 pages, a whole book. I didn't even explore the beginning. There's a very fascinating, I mean, I only quoted a little bit in this book, but really showing you how prayer can be this wonderful experience. Because for so many of us, myself included, for some years, prayer can become dry. I recall when I was a young kid, obviously you're just, look at it like this, you're a young kid, you're learning how to read Hebrew. It's exciting when you're doing the prayer as well. It's like just the difficulty of mastering the words, right? And suddenly you master all the words, then you're like, oh boy, now what, right? So I remember I was like 13, 14. I'm like, now I can, read the prayers, zoom through them, as you may hear me here in synagogue, right? I can read them really quick now, right? I'm like, whoa, but what's the meaning in that? And then I started to learn the meaning of it. Then I started to, studying the English side and learning the meaning of the prayers. But then I got to an age, after 4 or 5 years where I know all the meaning of all the prayers, all the Hebrew, I know what it means. But then I'm like, now that I knew what it means, now I'm like, well, actually, what the heck does it mean, right? Because actually, once you read the prayers in English many, many times, suddenly you're like, well, what is this actually saying, right? So then I got different, books of prayer that helped me understand the meaning of the prayers. So these are just examples where I'm just trying to present to you how prayer could be a meaningful experience, and it could be very monotonous and boring. It all really depends on the effort you put into it, and it requires effort. And no matter what I do here and what songs we sing, everybody's going to have to put in their own effort into prayer, because prayer is your personal experience with God. It's your personal moment with God, your personal relationship. And I can't do that for you. There's a moment, and God wants us to pray with the community when we can. But ultimately, prayer is about creating those relationships, starting back with the knowledge. God wants us to know him and think about him and contemplate about him and create that relationship with him, and give us that fire that you spoke about earlier, that fire and that feeling that can carry us throughout the day, to make, when we do a mitzvah, to make it feel meaningful. When we eat matzah, when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, prayer can be the conduit for all these great feelings that will enhance all of our religious lives. Yes, what was your question?
Not relevant.
Not relevant anymore. Okay. I want to end up with a story. So there's a lot that we can learn, and we can spend, I don't know if we're going to do this next week, so I have no idea. Like I said, I came here tonight, I just wanted to present one idea tonight. This general idea of studying about God, and why it's important. I do one day want to actually discuss why studying mysticism is important too. I find that's also an important topic, but maybe that will tie into prayer. Why do we need to study the mystical aspects of God in order to really pray? But again, we can't get everything at once. Let me just tell a story of the Maggid of Mezrich. So the Maggid of Mezrich was the second Hasidic Rebbe, and he had this story is going to present you this idea of why it's not enough to just know, I love God because of gratitude, or I love God because of forgiveness, or I love God because of creation. I love God, but you actually have to spend time on it. And this story really expresses the idea why. Because it's not enough to know, but you have to really know. It's not enough to just know in your mind, you have to really know. So the story of the Maggid of Mezrich, and I think I've said it many times, you got to make the knowledge, got to make a connection, what in Hebrew is called das. But so the story goes like this: the Maggid of Mezrich, he had a contemporary, and they were once study partners, and then as they went their respective lives, the Maggid of Mezrich became a Rebbe, Hasidic Rebbe, and his study partner became a business person. Okay, so what happened was, one time the business person came to visit the Maggid of Mezrich, and he saw him that he was praying a lot, praying all day. So he asked him, he says, why are you praying so long? I know the meaning of the prayers, you know the meaning of prayers, we study together. What's the difference? So he answered him, he says, listen, he says, you have a business somewhere, right? Part of your business is you have to go travel to faraway town, pick up the goods, bring it back. He says, why spend a couple days traveling there and going and picking it up and bring it back? Just close your eyes. Imagine in your mind that you actually went there and you picked up the goods and you brought it back. You do what you do in 5 days, an hour. He says, fool, I didn't realize you're such a batlan, studying Torah all day. He says, you can't just imagine, you have to actually go. You have to actually be there. You have to actually go to the marketplace to get the goods. Because that's the same idea, he says in prayer. He says, you know all the ideas, but if it's just some faraway thought, I'm actually experiencing it. I'm actually going and feeling those feelings towards God. Yeah, we study the same thing. We studied those same ideas, but to me, it's not just a knowledge, but it's an experience. It's an experience. So we need to contemplate and think in a way that these ideas become knowledge. That's where we started with. Not just have a belief in God, create this knowledge, and knowledge means the connection between the mind and the heart, and in a way that we create those feelings towards God and create that relationship that we are craving and God is craving. And so may we all do that very successfully. So maybe we will explore prayer more, maybe we won't, but even if I don't, now you got to pray, so you got to buy yourself some books on prayer. What can I say? We're gonna stop the Facebook.